Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. This afternoon we have the privilege and the honor of chatting with Ed Klein. Of course, he is renowned for several interesting books about this administration, that, of course, being the Obama administration. His most recent book, Blood Feud, and one that's generating a lot of conversation and, yeah, I think at times some controversy. So with that, Ed, good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Good afternoon, Lockwood. Wonderful to be with you.
Thanks again. And with this, I know that this has been a book that I'm most interested in, how you're able to get all this information, and with the caveat that you're going to share with us only what you can. But the whole issue of Blood Feud, the dispute between the Clintons and the Obamas, before we even get into that, I'm wondering, historically speaking, has there ever been a situation where two families have been this close to the White House and this close to, if you will, the seat of power, as the Clintons and the Obamas are? And of course, I'm hearkening back to the fact that the president at one point actually had to call in former President Bill Clinton to sort of recapture some of his administration to keep it on point. So I'm wondering, is there any historical precedent before we go into this dispute between these two families?
Well, when I sat down to report and then write Blood Feud, the Clintons versus the Obamas, I had in mind a somewhat similar situation between the Kennedys and, of course, Jimmy Carter, which was a brutal battle, Carter being the incumbent president, Kennedy launching and mounting a challenge to this sitting Democratic president and failing to succeed. Bill Clinton actually, in 2012, 2011 really, did a poll, and the poll showed that if Hillary challenged Obama in the primaries for the 2012 nomination, she might have won because she was much more popular in the Democratic fold. She declined to do so at the time, but Bill always thought that that was a mistake. So this feud between the Clintons and the Obamas, which is the subject of my book, is still ongoing, still very much in the news. Today, for instance, the Wall Street Journal had a piece about how Hillary Clinton is distancing herself from Obama, and we can talk about that.
All right, and just to remind folks, our guest, Ed Klein, the author of several books, particularly on the Obama administration. I do want to make mention of his background, former foreign editor for Newsweek, and served as editor-in-chief for the New York Times Magazine, and frequently contributing to Vanity Fair. Of course, now the author of the latest book, Blood Feud. You've taken on this administration in the past and have been very critical of the president. In my previous conversations with you about this, you've noted that President Obama, quite frankly, is very distant. Now, with that as sort of a backdrop, is he in fact distant in this relationship between the Clintons? And who is really behind this feud?
Well, what's behind the feud is that back in 2008, when Hillary and Barack Obama were vying for the nomination, the Obamas referred to Bill Clinton as a racist, something he's never forgotten, something that still gnaws at him and still annoys him.
Well, keeping in mind, he was described by many as America's first, quotation marks here, black president, because he seemed to communicate so well and associate and made that connection with African Americans in this country. And yes, I distinctly recall that. And in fact, as I recall, the Clintons had a sit down with the Obamas over that during the election, the campaign, did they not? They
did indeed. And then in 2012, Bill Clinton was ready to bury the hatchet and to back Obama in his re-election campaign. They came to a deal during a golf game at Andrews Air Force Base golf course, in which Bill said, okay, I'll back you if you back Hillary in 2016. And Bill made good on that promise. He gave that famous speech of his at the Democratic National Convention for Obama. And then when Obama got reelected, he reneged on the deal. He welched on the deal. He didn't come through. He said to the Clintons, I'm not ready to support you. And now, as I've reported and was on the front page of the New York Post yesterday, the Obamas are looking around for someone else other than Hillary in 2016, and have been talking very seriously to Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Now, I said earlier that you have noted that the President Obama is a little distant. Is he and please correct me if I'm wrong, but because he doesn't seem to engage issues, or maybe he just gives that impression, or is there someone else behind this feud between the Clintons and the Obamas? And I'm thinking either Michelle Obama or maybe Valerie Jarrett. First question, is the president fully engaged in this? And that, of course, is President Obama in this dispute, or is he just leaving it to others?
The president and his two chief advisors, his wife, Michelle, and Valerie Jarrett, who are his best friends with both the president and the first lady.
I know, yeah.
Speak in private in very negative terms about the Clintons.
Wow.
They feel that the Clintons, unlike them, are opportunists who don't really have any principles. And they say so in private to each other and to those around them. To answer your question, the president is very much engaged in this blood feud between him and the Clintons, as are Michelle and Valerie Jarrett.
Other than this observation that they are opportunists, what created this dispute at the outset? Is there any one issue other than obviously the campaign, but what precipitated?
There's a whole set of issues. I mean, the Democratic Party has been feuding between the McGovern far left populist wing and the Clinton more centrist left wing for many, many years now. And Obama's election was the triumph of that left wing of the party. The Clintons and the Obamas don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues. And that would include, I'm sure, immigration, in which I think Hillary would be tougher on the border, on foreign affairs, where Hillary, when she was Secretary of State, had really severe differences of opinion with the president. In fact, even got physical with him once over arming the moderate Syrian rebels. And she poked him in the chest, and he told his wife about that later. And Michelle didn't like that one little bit. Conservation is another issue where Hillary has been at one point in her career in favor of the XL Keystone Pipeline, and of course Obama has refused to give it the green light. So there are a lot of issues.
Our guest, Ed Klein, the book Blood Feud, and of course also the author of a book that I'm referring to, actually, The Amateur, in which you noted that the president himself does not really engage people and is not very close with a lot of people other than apparently Valerie Jarrett. But Ed, the interesting thing, and you bring up a point I want to touch on a few minutes from now, and that, of course, is does this pose a political problem for Hillary Clinton in her efforts going forward? This moderate versus the liberal wings, ultra-liberal wings of the Democrat Party. But I want to continue on this conversation with the president and his relationship with the Clintons for one more moment. In this conversation, the president has engaged, and I really can't recall from my experience in history of presidents being so closely entwined as former President Clinton and President Obama. And, of course, the appropriate spousal units, Hillary being the Secretary of State and Michelle being, of course, the First Lady. Is that entwinement also part of the heat of the conversation between them? If, in other words, if they were distant from one another, would it be a little less? And I'm curious, what is the feelings in the White House? Because President Clinton and Hillary, they're still remembered in the White House. So is the closeness of their relationship also fueling this feud?
Well, it's hard to exactly answer the question the way you posed it, but I would say that there was a lot of debate in the White House when Obama was elected about appointing Hillary Secretary of State. Michelle and Valerie Jarrett were opposed. Okay. Obama's political advisors thought it was a good idea, and the reason, which gets back to your question, is that by bringing Hillary into the administration, they would somehow neuter and keep Bill Clinton quiet.
Keep your friends close, keep your enemies even closer, I guess.
Right, exactly.
Ed Klein, the author of Blood Feud, Viewpoints on the talk station, FM 107, AM 1240.
Hey, it's Big John R. Buy, sell, trade, and give stuff away on Swap Shop. Saturday mornings at 7 on the Talk Station.
Our guest, Ed Klein, the author of Blood Feud. We're talking with him about this most recent book and, of course, an excerpt from The Amateur I mentioned a few moments ago. Ed, in talking about this subject of Blood Feud, did you refer back to your earlier book, The Amateur, in the process? And just a quick question on that one.
Yes, of course I did, because there was a lot of unused material that I had from interviews. I did over 200 interviews for The Amateur, which, by the way, was #1 on the New York Times list for 6 weeks in a row.
Right.
And this book, the new one, Blood Feud, the Clintons versus the Obama, has debuted in its first week as #1 on the New York Times combined ebook and hardcover list.
All right. The topic then goes to the relationship with the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and the Obama administration and the Obama family. I'm going to stop and ask another question related to the family. Does the First Lady have undue influence? Because as you've mentioned a moment ago, both Valerie Jarrett and the First Lady were adamantly opposed to Hillary being appointed Secretary of State. And as a matter of fact, in your book, they referred to her as Hildebeest. Is that correct?
Hildebeest, yes.
Yeah.
After the menacing gnu that roams the Serengeti in Africa.
Right. So are your sources saying that the First Lady has significant influence over the president's activities and decisions?
Well, you make a good point. First ladies now in the modern era, some of them have had a lot of influence. Certainly Mrs. Carter in the Jimmy Carter administration, Mrs. Reagan in the Reagan administration. But, of course, then Laura Bush did not.
Right.
I don't think Barbara Bush had a lot of influence on the first Bush administration either. Hillary had enormous influence. She was really co-president and more important than the vice president in Bill Clinton's 8 years. And then we get now to the Obamas, and there's absolutely no question that Michelle Obama, along with her best friend, consigliere, and conduit, Valerie Jarrett, occupies a huge influence on this president, and that there is this sort of triumvirate, Barack, Michelle, and Valerie Jarrett running things in the White House, and more important than any other official, including the Chief of Staff.
I was going to ask the question, how can the Chief of Staff even operate under this circumstance?
Well, they can't, really, because Valerie Jarrett constantly interferes. What happens is Bill Daley, the second Chief of Staff, pointed this out. He would come to an agreement with the President, Obama, about a certain policy or an appointment. Valerie Jarrett that evening would disappear into the elevator and go up to the residence, second-floor residence, have dinner with the President and First Lady and their daughters, stay up there during the evening, gossiping, schmoozing, and then expressing her opinions. And the next morning, the President would come down and countervene the agreement he had with his Chief of Staff, Bill Daley. And Daley finally threw up his arms and said, I can't do this job, and quit in less than a year.
All right, let's shift gears now to the Clintons, because obviously no love lost there as well. And as you said a few moments ago, the former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, is distancing herself from this administration. 2 quick questions. Is there sufficient time in order for her to create enough distance not to be tainted by some of the actions of this administration? And if so, how does she best go about doing this in light of the fact that she has been such a supporter of much of the president's? She carried the water in instances, as you pointed out a moment ago, she was not interested in doing. She wanted to arm the Syrian rebels. She was, I think, caught in a real twist with the Benghazi incident. So how is she handling all of this?
Well, I think the Wall Street Journal piece on today's front page and my book, which coincides with what the Wall Street Journal says, point out very clearly that Bill Clinton's strategy as the de facto campaign manager of his wife's march to the White House, that his main strategy is how to do exactly what you're asking, is separate and put space between Hillary and this increasingly unpopular president, Barack Obama, who's now, the majority, not the majority, but a great number of Americans in a recent poll now refer to him as the worst president in 70 years. So she has to put space between. And what she needs to do, as somebody was quoted in the Wall Street Journal today as saying, she has to run over him with a bus,
wow,
but do it very slowly and very gently.
Our guest, Ed Klein. Whoa, those are very, that's an interesting description. All right, the book is Blood Feud. Ed, the question continues then with Hillary. She's obviously caught between these two warring factions within the Democrat Party. And I say warring factions, my description, not yours, the ultra-liberals and the more mainstream conservatives. Is there a schism within the Democrat Party, and what's only being played out between the feud of these two families?
Well, that's the whole point of this new book, Blood Feud. Yes, that there is this huge battle going on for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party, which has the base of which is very extremely left-wing, and the establishment part of it is more centrist. And so just like there's this battle going on in the Republican Party between the Tea Party and the establishment wings, there's a similar battle going on. And it's personified, as I write in this book, Blood Feud, by the Clintons versus the Obamas.
Interesting. All right, going back to the Clintons here for a few more minutes, and again, our guest, Ed Klein, the author, Blood Feud, the Obamas versus the Clintons. You note in here that Obama wanted Hillary to take the fall from Benghazi. She's refused, yet I don't see how she can distance herself from it. How much more of a fall would the president have had his Secretary of State take?
Well, I think the best way to answer that question is to reflect what Bill Clinton was telling his legal advisors to whom I spoke and his political advisors, which is that he believed that the White House and Axelrod, who was the political guru for Obama and others, were trying to hang the albatross of Benghazi around Hillary's neck, which was 6 weeks before the 2012 re-election campaign, so that Obama wouldn't be tainted by it. But Hillary, as you know, with Bill's very vociferous argument, decided not to go on those 5 Sunday talk shows that Susan Rice eventually went on, and ducked that bullet. But then, when she was hauled before the Congressional Committee and stupidly said, what difference at this point does it make? And of course it made a lot of difference. I think that quote and that clip, that video clip of her flailing her arms and getting angry and saying it didn't make any difference now what happened in Benghazi, is going to come back to haunt her in 2016.
All right. Looking now at the 2016 race, 2 quick questions for you, and we'll thank you for your time this afternoon. Ed Klein, author of Blood Feud and many other books. I'll mention them a little later on. But the topic then goes to, it's a twofer, Hillary's age and her health. And there are still some questions as to her health, and I'm wondering if possibly this administration might be using those as, particularly her health, but possibly her age as well, as trump cards in order to sort of keep the Clintons from totally unraveling on them. Your thoughts on that?
My thought is that Hillary is telling interviewers, and has in recent weeks, that she's in the pink of health. And that happens not to be true. It's actually quite a big lie, because her most recent checkup after she fainted and had a blood clot indicated from a stress test that she took at New York Presbyterian Hospital that she has a heart valve problem, and that the doctors were considering doing a major surgery to replace her heart valve, which would have required her to go on a heart-lung machine, which is very dangerous, and that in any case she has to be monitored, her doctors say, for the rest of her life. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say whether this qualifies or disqualifies her for the presidency, but it certainly raises a question that the public needs to know her full medical record so that we can make a decision, keeping in mind that if people vote Hillary the next president of the United States, they're not going to only get Hillary, they're going to get Bill Clinton as a 2-for-1. And if Hillary, because of her health, starts to fail, you could be sure that it's going to be Bill Clinton who's going to start running the country rather than the vice president. So this is a big deal, and it requires Hillary to release her medical records.
Our guest, Ed Klein. Ed, as you look back at this book and your efforts, did anything pop out at you as far as, this takes a little bit of a detour, on Bill Clinton? Because it strikes me that of the four principals, Michelle, President Obama, Hillary, and Bill Clinton, the ultimate, if you will, driver of the bus is Bill Clinton. How wrong how right am I?
Well, he certainly comes across in my book, Blood Feud, the Clintons versus the Obamas, as the best politician of the lot, no question about that. He's probably the best politician of his generation and certainly one of the great politicians of all time. However, he thought he had a deal with Obama, and the amateur Obama outfoxed the pro Clinton when Obama reneged on the deal. So Bill Clinton, being, as I say, this great politician, is certainly not going to just sit there and take it. And I think you'll see as he strategizes Hillary's campaign as we move toward 2016, they're going to have a lot of not so nice things to say about the Obama administration, including the lack of leadership, the decline in American influence and prestige abroad, things, the economy. They're already saying that this economy is awful.
Disaster.
Burden and disaster on many, many people, which Obama has refused to say. So there's going to be a lot of Clinton versus the Obama stuff coming out in the next several months.
Our guest, and I thank you for being with us this afternoon, Ed Klein, and also, as I mentioned a moment ago, The Amateur. And I'm thinking, Ed, that really this is, I don't want to describe it as a sequel, but these are two good books. One helps you understand the other. Am I thinking correctly on that?
Absolutely, yes.
The Amateur and Blood Feud, and of course Blood Feud, the most recent, the Clintons versus the Obamas. Ed, final question. Is this possibly a significant tear within the Democrat Party? We're just watching in slow motion as we speak.
Well, it's certainly a possibility if in fact, Elizabeth Warren throws her hat into the ring. I think a real answer to that question would be if you read Blood Feud, which is available at Amazon online or at Barnes & Noble, either online or at the bookstore or Books A Million. I think you get a real good sense of whither the Democratic Party and where this country is headed.
Ed Klein, the author of Blood Feud. Ed, as always, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Lockwood.
Viewpoints on the Talk Station, FM 107, AM 1240.